What's up, guys? I'm Nobody Special, and America's rent is rising, and it's rising fast. But if you look at the official inflation numbers that come from the government, America's rent has barely moved. What gives? Ready? Hit it. Thank you for joining me. I'm Jack Gamble, and I'm Nobody Special. And America's rent is going up, and it's going up fast. According to data released yesterday by CoreLogic, America's rent has risen an average of 7.5% year over year, the largest spike in 16 years. Now, before we dig into those numbers, if you guys wouldn't mind doing me a big favor, smash that beautiful like button, subscribe to my channel, and hit the notification bell. It would really help me out, and I would be forever in your debt. Now, let's look at the numbers. Now, according to this data, the largest increases came in areas like Phoenix that saw an increase of 16.5% and Las Vegas with an increase of 12.9%. Meanwhile, certain areas of the country actually saw a decrease in rent, with Chicago down about 1% and Boston down the most at negative 2.7%. But overall, the trend is up and up big. America's rent is rising, and it's rising fast, faster than most people can absorb. Now, if you've been following my channel, you saw this video I did recently where I predicted that the July CPI number would come in bigger than expected, with rents being the biggest driver. Now, I was very shocked when I saw the CPI number that said the rent had only gone up 0.2%, because I had been seeing charts and all kinds of headlines that said America's rent was rising and rising fast. And this information that I saw today from CoreLogic only supports that. So what is going on? Well, first off, you've probably seen the trend in home prices is going up. Now, that's probably your biggest input into rents. More expensive homes, higher mortgage payments, higher rents. Now, another thing that's going on is this trend of institutional home ownership. Now, if you've been trying to buy a home recently, you may have noticed that you've been involved in a bidding war with someone like BlackRock, which is pricing a lot of people out of the market. And we're starting to see that effect in home sales. Now, BlackRock and these other hedge funds and institutional organizations have been driven into the housing market because they're starved for yield. These are wealth managers who have elderly clients that need yield and fixed income to live off of. Now, historically, that yield would have been found in the bond market. But thanks to Uncle J. Powell and his $120 billion a month at least of asset purchases and his low interest rates, bonds are yielding a historically low amount. Bonds just aren't yielding enough to satisfy the needs of these institutional investors. So these outfits are being forced to look elsewhere for yield, like stocks and now real estate, where they can buy homes, rent them out, and use those rental payments as the yield that their clients are looking for. So with this astronomical rise in home prices and the subsequent rise in rent, why are we only seeing a 0.2% increase in rent on the CPI read? Well, a wise man by the name of Samuel Clemens, you may know him as Mark Twain, once said, "There are lies, damn lies, and statistics." Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you about owner's equivalent rent, or OER. You see, housing is the single largest factor in CPI, accounting for 42.4% of the total statistic. And of that 42.4%, 24.3% of it comes from something called owner's equivalent rent. And owner's equivalent rent is one of the biggest ways that the Federal Reserve jukes those statistics to make inflation say whatever they want it to say. You see, while America has seen a 7.5% rent increase, owner's equivalent rent says the rent has only gone up 0.2%. So you have to look at how owner's equivalent rent is generated. And according to Investopedia, generally owner's equivalent rent is obtained through surveys asking homeowners the following question. If somebody were to rent your home today, how much do you think it would rent for monthly, unfurnished, and without utilities? That's right, folks. When the Bureau of Labor Statistics calculates the inflation data, instead of just looking at the average rent and saying the average rent has gone up, they perform unscientific polls where they call people in different cities around the country and they say, how much would you rent your house for? And then based on what those people tell them, that's the number they use to calculate rent for the Consumer Price Index. And the result of that is we're getting a 0.2% increase in rent in our official data, even though the actual rents of these homes has gone up 7.5% year over year. That is a huge skew in the data, and it makes inflation seem like it is less of a problem than it really is. Now, this CoreLogic data is from June, and it's August now, and our latest CPI was from July. So I would expect that eventually Even this owner's equivalent rent statistic is going to start being affected by the reality that rent is going up. So this OER number should increase and increase big in the coming months, which means we've got some very big CPI numbers coming in the future. Now, another thing to keep an eye on here is this trend of institutional investors being driven into riskier asset classes in order to achieve the yield. And what do I mean by that? Historically, your most elderly clients have been bond-heavy investors. They go to more of a fixed income, right? They're at a stage in their life where they don't need riskier investments. They just need regular payments. They don't have time to weather the fallout from a market crash. So historically, these investors have been driven into bonds. Well, right now, bonds are yielding almost nothing, and they're certainly not keeping up with inflation, not even the bogus CPI inflation. So what's happening is BlackRock and these other institutions that manage the wealth for the baby boomers who are in retirement now are being driven into these riskier asset classes because their clients are demanding more yield. That means stocks are getting bid up higher, and that means now they're even going into real estate. And I'm not just talking about mortgage-backed securities. I'm talking about the actual ownership of real estate. This is a dangerous trend, especially when you consider how many people just flat out are not paying their rent right now because of these moratoriums. And, well, the eviction moratoriums were declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, and then the CDC just came out and said, well, we're going to change the wording of our moratorium, and now it's back in place. And then sooner or later, the courts are going to say, no, you can't do that either. So do we have to pay our rent or not? And why is BlackRock investing grandmom and pop-pop's money into a house when apparently the government says the tenants don't even need to pay any rent? This is a dangerous trend, and it's something to keep an eye on. If the real estate market were to suddenly take a turn and these institutions start cashing out of the real estate market, you're going to have a flood of supply hitting the market. And nobody wants to buy a home that you can't live in because there's a deadbeat tenant in there who hasn't paid rent in a year and it's illegal to evict them. So the market is making the same mistake we've seen in the past, where when they get starved for yield, they start taking riskier and riskier investments. But because it's somebody else's money, they're not terribly worried about it, aka the moral hazard that we saw in 2008. Another thing to keep in mind is as rent and shelter becomes a higher percentage of the average American's income, that money has to come from somewhere else, either in the form of debt or a reduction in spending in other categories, whether it's travel, vacation, automotive, or just other discretionary spending. So that's something to keep an eye on as well. Guys, I want to thank you for your time and for watching this video. Please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Hit that notification bell. I'd be forever in your debt, and it would really help me out. In the meantime, live small and dream big.